Hello, everyone. This is Kevin from Designhill and your host for the day. I hope you and your family are keeping well and safe, taking all the precaution and taking care of your near and dear ones. Welcome again to yet another event by Designhill. And today we'll be discussing different brand building strategies and hacks, especially for small business. This event is brought to you by Designhill, world's leading creative marketplace that caters to the creative needs of business and individuals alike who can source high quality designs from professional designers through its print on demand marketplace called Print Shop by Designhill. And you can also buy 50 unique products with thousands of artworks created by world class community of independent artists. So moving ahead, let me introduce to our speakers for today. We have with us Lisa Hastings. Lisa is creative director and brand strategist with SGK based in Sydney, Australia. With 20 years of brand and agency experience, she has worked with brands, businesses, individuals across US and Europe. Lisa, go ahead and say hi to our audiences.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining and thanks for having me on.
Then we have Matt Davis. Matt helps businesses leaders align powerful brand strategies. He is an entrepreneur based out in the UK and carries over 18 years of experience working with startups to huge brands, naming few like Nestle, Capital One, Nikon, etc. Matt has recently listed as a top UK 50 UK advisor. Matt, go ahead and say hi to our guests, our audiences.
Hi, everyone. I wish you would remind everybody of how many hundreds of years I've been in the business, but lovely to be with you all.
Then we have Peter Wilkin. Peter is a professional speaker, a brand building specialist, and an author based in Canada. He helps individuals and organizations to think and act more creatively, to manage change, address business challenges, and build stronger brands. Say hi, Peter, to everyone.
Hello, everyone. Good to be here. Thanks for joining us.
Then we have Rob Levinson. Rob Levinson is a corporate brand strategist and personal brand coach in the United States, whose expertise is in helping clients to develop powerful brand narratives that get them noticed, remembered, and produced. Rob, go ahead. Rob, you mute.
Okay, how's that for a good start? Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Then we have Steph Hamelink. Steph is a designer turned strategist based in Belgium. He worked as a successful freelance brand specialist with a wide variety of international clients in the FMCG space.
Hey everyone, hope we can deliver some value for y'all.
Thank you so much guys for taking out the time from your busy schedule and joining us today for this panel discussion. It's an honor to have you all here with us. And a big thank you to the Designhill events team for putting up such an amazing set of panelists. Great, so before we start the session, here's a big announcement. We are giving away certificates to all the attendees who will stick till the end of the session. You just can't miss the chance to stay tuned till the very end. Also, you can take a screenshot of this event, post it on the Twitter, use hashtag Designhill events, tag us on DesignhillDH and all our speakers, whose Twitter handle will be in the chat session on the right side of your panel. One lucky winner will have a chance to get a $50 print shop gift card coupon. All right, so before we start the session, let's quickly look at the Designhill and what it's all about.
Looking to get your boss to remember your name? Head to the world's number one creative marketplace.
My company promoted me to head up our latest real estate development project. I was excited, then anxious, then petrified. How was I going to hire the team, get the designs completed, and design beautiful presentation materials on our lean budget while impressing my bosses, some of whom are still learning my name?
Good job, Mitch.
My name's Lawrence. That's why I went to Designhill and got the design help I needed that fit within my company's brand guidelines. The process was simple. Designhill's design contest ensured I'd get a ton of results I'd love. Start by picking a number of designs that inspire you. This one's good, and that one. This one speaks to me. Then share some information about the project. Lastly, pick a package that fits your budget. Do you just want a logo, or do you want it all? Then, boom. I got more than 60 custom design options to choose from, as well as all the other graphic design assets I wanted. And it's all backed by Designhill's 100% money-back guarantee. If I don't find a design I like, I get my money back. You can't lose. Now I have what I need to make a splash at my meetings, with everything from business cards, pamphlets, posters, and more. It's real.
Let the world know it's real and build your brand with Designhill.
All right, that was all about Design Hill, and now we are all set to start the session. We'll keep taking up questions during the session, so if you have any questions, please drop them in the question section on the screen. Let's get started. So for our first question for the panel is what is brand identity and why do we need one? Let's start with Rob. Rob, you are on mute.
Okay, I clearly don't belong on this panel at all. Brand identity, it is the images, the language, the photographs, the icons that we use to associate with our brands, and they are key. I am just so aware that people really just don't read that much anymore. So we're living in a super visual time. So if you don't have a captivating image that is recognizable and compelling, then people won't know who your brand is. So brand identity is absolutely everything.
What do you think, Matt? Matt, you are also on mute.
Oh my God.
This is awesome. This is awesome. What a catastrophe. Just repeat the question for me, please, Kevin.
Yeah. So, okay, you want the question? So my question is, what is brand identity and why do we need one?
Right. So, okay. I like this question because I think we need to start with some definitions, and I'm pretty sure, most of us are aligned, but it might just be helpful. So I'm going to throw one of my definitions out there, see what we think. So I define brand as the meaning people attach to you and your offer. So it's wider than a logo and some fonts, but logo and fonts come into it, right? So why do we need a brand identity? Your brand identity is how you go out into the world. So once you understand who you are, then you need to position yourself so you're articulating and explaining who you are to the right people. So visual identity is crucial if you want to be recognized, if you want people to understand who you are, and if really you want people to attach meaning to you. The big question, of course, is how you manage that meaning, and that's where brand strategy comes in, and that's hopefully what we'll be talking about a little bit later.
Amazing. So my next question is to basically Peter. So here you go. What is the purpose of one second? Why is the purpose so critical for building the brand? How can one articulate a purpose that will inspire the audience to trust and support the brand?
How can one articulate a purpose that will articulate and support the brand? I'm glad it follows on from the visual identity question, because too often the focus is on when people say, I need to rebrand or do a branding, they're just talking about visual identity. And although that's critical and it's important, it needs to be consistent in reflecting what the promise of the brand is. We used to refer that as the superficial packaging of the brand. It's important, but it's not as important as the substance of what you actually stand for in people's minds. And that is ultimately, the purpose, the territory that you own in people's minds. We did that through defining what we call the DNA, and having a simple formula for being able to craft and articulate a DNA, which is really defining that territory. And the heart of your DNA was the promise, what was your overarching commitment to your most valuable customers. And part of that, following on from that promise, was what was the benefit that they get from delivering against that promise. What was your role, your purpose, your raison d'etre? Simon Sinek's why was the key part. And then finally wrapping it up in terms of the spirit or the culture of the brand, the way in which you represent it yourself. And those four elements combined with things like brand assets, icons, become your unique DNA and become cemented over time and become a formula for replicating consistent experiences that build your brand. Kind of long answer, but that's how I'd relate to the purpose. So not that visual identity is not important, it is, but it comes after the positioning of the experience that you deliver.
Okay, what's your Steph? What's your take on it?
Purpose. I'm a bit critical of brand purpose in the sense that I think it's been a little bit overused and misunderstood from time to time. I think part of that is because Simon Sinek was such a big hype, and it is an important exercise, but there's been some critical notes on purpose. And I think the problem really is where we start to overlap purpose with corporate social responsibility, sustainability. Like, it becomes a bit of a cliche where you see brands start to communicate in a way that it feels almost like they want to be. And I think that's where we have to see that purpose is mainly, for me, is a very good internal exercise to make sure everybody is aligned and understand what the brand is about and why it exists. But we also need to be cautious of going over the top with our brand communication and claiming things that aren't even relevant for our, what I like to call the brand promise. I think that's the only like critical caveat I would say to purpose.
Lisa, do you feel the same?
I think the word purpose is an interesting word to use. So I sort of sit a little bit in the middle, because I think the word purpose suggests something that isn't always what you mean. I think you need to define almost what type of brand that you are. Are you a challenger? Are you a disruptor? Are you a craft type of brand? Or are you one of those kind of bigger power player brands? And then you can define what the purpose. I think the brand promise is probably, to Steph's point, it's a nice way to put it. It's kind of you thinking about it from a human-centered point of view. Because this word purpose has suddenly suggested that we have to have this big role in the world, this thing that we stand for. And sometimes when a brand starts, you don't always know all of those things when you start. You just start. And it starts to become clearer when you work with the experts, when you work with the strategists, and you start pulling all those pieces apart. Sometimes you don't know how defined that purpose is until you start going on the journey.
Absolutely. Great. Matt, so we're going for, okay, Rob, go ahead.
I just wanted to add to the whole discussion about purpose. And, you know, I think that contemporarily customers expect the brands that they align with to do more than just sell them stuff or sell them services. So I think that companies today feel as though they have to express a purpose. And to support what Lisa said, a lot of times this falls down when that purpose isn't authentic. It's when a lot of people sit around the boardroom and say, what should we stand for and what should we get behind? In my mind, the most successful companies have purposes that are led by someone internally that has a real passion for whatever their purpose may be. But it's really all about being authentic, I think.
Matt, where do you stand on the purpose?
Yeah. So, I mean, for me, I hear everything everybody's saying, and I do agree that sometimes we can get a bit, ahead of ourselves with purpose. But I will say this: why is it that businesses need this kind of thinking? And I think somebody said it earlier. It might have been you, Rob, or you, Peter. It's that alignment, right? Because I think there is this kind of thing about brand being the meaning other people attach to us. But this is the bit where I think purpose kind of becomes really important. It's when you're trying to align not only a leadership team, but also the teams underneath them. And if you're a small business, it's a great idea, in my view, to start defining some of these big questions early, because this affects your decision-making internally and in terms of the brand expression externally. But internally, for example, you might have different ways of training your staff, recruiting your staff, onboarding your staff, inspiring your staff, if you've got those answers set. And that ultimately works its way out to the customer experience, because whatever your staff do ultimately eventually ends up in front of a customer. So for me, alignment is a crucial reason why you would define something around purpose, and inspiring and attracting talent is a key part often missed out in these conversations. So for me, that's important.
Cool. So we talk about purpose. So let's jump into the question where from macro to micro. So Matt, suggest some brand building strategies for smaller brands which they can apply to achieve their goals like today.
Well, it's let's just define another thing. Like, what is a brand strategy, right? Because that in itself is it's a nightmare, isn't it? It's ironic that we're talking about brand and identity, and I actually think branding itself has a bit of a crisis, because we all have different sort of meanings or understandings. So if brand is the meaning people attach to us, branding is the attempt to manage the meaning, then what's a strategy? What's a brand strategy? And a strategy for me, in simple terms, is a plan, right? It's a high level plan to manage meaning. So that usually, in my book, contains answers to some very simple but big questions. Why do we exist beyond making money? Who do we exist to serve, and why should they care? And how should we show up? And that's at quite a high level, right? This isn't tactical. This isn't, campaign based, or even like if you're looking internally, it's not like, commercially based. This is just at a high level and a sense of direction. This is what we stand for. This is our point of view. This is our rally cry. So the strategy is to, in my view, the first step is to set that, is to define that. And as Lisa says, sometimes that's really tough, particularly when you're starting out, to be relevant, to be authentic, and also real, right? Steph mentions, is it real? It has to be genuine and authentic. You can't say we're going to change the world and then never really have any real, strategy to branch out of your local region, for example. It seems a bit stupid to say we're going to change the world and what you've never flown outside of Rotherham, right? And that's a little place in the UK. So, you've got to be real. You've got to be real, and you've got to set this in a way that is inspirational. So I would say, first step, define, and then second step, you've got to begin to live it. And I'll just say this and then shut up. I think there's two strands for living brand strategy, which I've already hinted at. One is internally. How do you create a customer experience, an employee experience and a culture which aligns to the high level? And the second is externally. How do we show up? And this is where Designhill and the great work you guys do and all of the amazing designers around the world show up. How do they translate this so that the brand looks great from a marketing perspective? But again, it goes deeper. What about the experiences that you're creating? What about the customer experience? So employee experience, customer experience should ladder into your brand strategy, which should also then kind of push forward the commercial of the business. That's my position.
Peter, what do you think about the strategies, and can you give like simple 3 strategies that a small business can use like today?
Yeah, I think my advice would be, don't over sweat it. I mean, there is so much information out there, and you're listening to suppose with brand experts here. They can, and I forgive me if we get into the brand jargon. I would say simplify things, don't over sweat it. Focus on a promise, because at the end of the day, you will be thinking much more about defining your brand than any of your customers will be. They will take out maybe one key association, and you need to work very hard at that to get noticed in the first place. So focus on what your key promise is, what it is, your overarching commitment to them, what your desired outtake is. If they were to say your brand name, what would you stand for? And make sure that your promise is relevant to your target customer. You need to be focused on your target customer. Make sure that it's a compelling offer. You can't. My old boss David Ogilvy said you can't bore your customer into buying your product. You can only interest them into buying it. So make sure it's compelling. Make sure it's differentiating as much as it can be, and above all, that it's credible, that what you're promising you deliver. And if you can do those 4 things, you will build a successful brand. So that's it. Stay focused. Don't over sweat it. Keep it simple.
Steph, that as Peter was saying, don't over sweat it. But what we see in the field, that people are so, they're worried that they will look like the others, that they tend to do, the same kind of branding, same kind of style, same strategy. So how they can be relevant, still different, according to you?
Yeah. In terms of brand jargon, I'd like to introduce the word distinctiveness. It's my favorite word. I think it's a key aspect of branding, is how do you make sure you can be easily recognized from competitors. I mean, it's such a basic thing that we often forget. We over invest in meaning and all of this stuff, but just making sure you don't have the same colors, the same feeling, the same tonality as your competitors is such an important part of that. And I think a big part of that is doing research, making sure you understand where your product or service, where your promotion is gonna live in between competitors. If you're on a shelf, just go to the store and understand what colors they're using and how you will stand out in that space. But that's also online, it's everywhere. I think that's really key, really making sure you're distinctive out of the gate. And sure enough, you can't have the McDonald's arches or the Apple logo straight out of it. It's like a very, very long-term game, but make sure you have those assets in place, and that at least you did your due diligence of looking at competitors and making sure you have something that fits you, but is also different. And one more thing I'd like to add, is a bit more tactical than what we've been talking about, but I think a brand building strategy that is often ignored for smaller brands is looking at earned media and trying to tell your story there, because you can get a lot of like reach that otherwise is very hard to pay for with like social media ads or whatever. And I think it's I've seen it personally with a lot of startup brands I've helped, that this is a really good accelerator to get early feedback and market validation.
You know, I want to. Yeah, I'm really glad that Steph brought up earned media. I started my career in PR, and we always had to ask ourselves 3 questions when we were promoting a client. The first question is, who cares? Who cares? What am I going to get out of this, and why today? And I think that if any small business can answer those questions, who cares? What's the customer going to get out of it? And why should they do something today? That is the fast track strategy for success, I think.
Lisa, what's your take on it?
And I think that's a really good point. So we've talked a lot here about a product or a service or a thing. And what we're seeing is the world pivoting more around the whole brand experience. So it's not just about a lot of people, a lot of small entrepreneurs, challenger brands, small startups come and go, I have this, or I have this for the world. And actually what we need to do is as strategists, what our job is to get people thinking about what's its role in the world? Why do we live here? So it's not a product or a service, it's an experience. And what's the experience that you're bringing to the consumer? I think it's twisting that mindset. And I guess I would say one of the strategies that people can do if they start with that, what is your purpose, and start asking themselves, the biggest challenge is to understand yourself as a business, ask what you're not just think about your competitors and try and differentiate. I think what Steph said about distinctiveness is a really good point to go. It's about being distinctive, not just different. It's about what makes you you, and then how you communicate that back into the world across multiple touch points, and being consistent and authentic across whatever channel you put it across on. I think a lot of people go wrong and just push marketing out. There's so much, we talk about it in our industry a lot about clutter and so much marketing. And actually it's not always more, it's often about directness. It's about simplification, like we've already said, in whichever way you put that out in the world.
Great point, Lisa. Thank you so much. So Matt, we are hearing like a lot of words so I want to ask you a question. So we have brand awareness and we have brand recognition. So what is the difference between these two? And do you have any real life example of successful brand building that you would like to share with our audience?
Okay, so what's the difference between brand awareness and brand recognition? So I guess that, am I aware of Apple? Yes, right? Because I understand what they offer, I understand what they stand for. Everyone always uses Apple, and it's awful, I know, but it's just because we all understand it, right? I'm just saying that before Steph leads into that. Right. Second thing, right? So awareness is like if I say it, you're kind of aware of it. Now, would I recognize an Apple advert or an Apple product or Apple packaging? Yes, because it's designed a certain way. So I think the first one is an awareness of what that brand actually does, why it exists, what I get out of it. The second one is do I recognize it? And I don't think the two things are automatically sort of exclusive, but I just think there's an emphasis on the two. So that's my definition of those two, seeing as we're playing the definitions game. Although I think I'm the only one that started chucking definitions around, so I apologize everyone for that, but hey. But then the next question is, do I have any examples of it? Well, there's a basic examples with Apple. I mean, I think there's if you're a small brand, and this is, brand hacks for small businesses. So if you're a small brand, you've got to think about, okay, how am I going to make people aware of me? And that's one question. And the second is how do I get them to recognize me? These are two different questions, because one is about creating an experience and an offer and packaging it up in such a way that people can't ignore. Sometimes you might want to do, a bit of guerrilla tactics and kind of go out there and do something a bit crazy so people become aware of you. And then the second thing is every time they then come across my offer, can they recognize that that's about building distinctive, creative assets messaging that Steph's mentioned?
Rob, what do you feel about it?
Yeah, I am listening closely to what Matt says and taking copious notes because it's so fascinating. What I would add to that is that for a company to really gain that brand awareness is through consistent messaging at every point of contact. And that is, I think, key to really any small business building a brand, is that wherever they show up, wherever a prospect or a customer sees them, they have to have a similar experience. And that is everything from how they present themselves visually to the messaging around it. So to my mind, recognition is, oh yeah, I know that brand, I know that logo, but awareness is how they have connected with me on a more personal level. And that again is through, consistent and authentic messaging and positioning.
Steph, do you have any real life examples, that you can share, like how from brand awareness to brand recognition happen?
Let me think. Yeah, I think what I would like to say is a lot of clients I work with, especially smaller brands, they mainly focus on the recognition or even the lower layers of the funnel where they already have people that know them, and it's more about conversion. They're very much focused on making sure those people that know them really buy the product. And I think that first layer of awareness is a very tricky one, because first, it's hard to measure. And secondly, it's a bit vaguer. And I think like what Peter said about you only have maybe that one association, and it's really hard to build. I think there, as a small brand, it's really hard because you don't have the money to invest in those things. But again, coming back to my earlier point, maybe looking at other ways to activate guerrilla marketing, PR, whatever you can do to build that first layer to go beyond like just the people that already know you, I think is a very smart play. Not really an example though, sorry.
Peter, do you have any examples?
Yeah, I do. It's maybe not a very good one, but I want to go back to your question on awareness and recognition, because I'm clearly probably the thickest one in this panel, because I don't really understand the difference between the two, frankly. I think a better question is the difference between awareness and affinity. And I have far too many clients who think that, to Rob's point on the PR, publicity is good. Any publicity is good publicity. And that is just absolutely not true. You can have very high awareness and very low affinity. And, sorry to go political on you here, but my example would be Donald Trump. A lot of people are aware of him. Not a lot of people, well, not in Vancouver anyway, align with him. And that's good, by the way. That's the other thing, that small companies think that they should be all things to all people. Don't be afraid to say, as Lisa was saying, what you are not. And sometimes it's so much easier to say these are the kind of people and kind of values that we do not align with. Absolutely. And then you start whittling down to your focus. So sorry, I twisted the question to an answer and an example that I had in my head. Sorry, but there you go.
So as we're saying that awareness and because we're talking about small businesses, sometimes awareness may cost money. Okay. But due to the social media, then now, it's easier for people to reach out to their audiences, but then it's super duper crowded. So Lisa, how important are social media platform for brand building? And are there any milestones to cross so that they can leverage them, especially for small businesses?
So I think it's critical, obviously, because we all talk about brands here, but actually there's a level where you do need to reach into marketing and promote the brand that you create and all of these amazing things that you define it as. So it obviously at some point needs to live in the world of going across these marketing channels. And I think really when you work with a strategist, or if you sit and you do some of the tips and tricks yourself, you work out where your audience or the people you want to reach live. And that's how you define the channels that you want to go out on. We all know that video, and I know one of your later questions is very much about digital channels. There are so many digital channels now, and you'd be crazy as a new brand not to be exploring those channels. The other great thing is with social media, use social media as a challenger brand, because it's something you can actualize for pretty low cost. You can try and test.
Matt?
So what's the question again, Kevin?
So basically, my question was, how important are social media platforms for brand building, and are there any different, like typical milestone to cross so that they can leverage them, especially for small business? So when I say a milestone, that means a number of followers, number of views, that type,
Yeah, sure. Okay, so I like the way Lisa sort of handled that question, because we've been talking about strategy at the brand level. And now what we're doing is we're diving into tactics in the marketing level. Okay, so these in my head, very different, right? I play in the strategy side and advise and consult in the tactical, but try not to get my hands too dirty, because frankly, it's skilled work and it needs real focus in there, and it's not, detail is not where I play best. So, but saying that, clearly social media is super powerful, right? You've got to reach the right people. So as we mentioned in the strategy section, it's understanding who you serve. And then if you really go into it, you want to kind of segment your audiences and understand. And that's what, in my view, like paid media, so Facebook, even LinkedIn, you can get super sharp and super focused on the type of people that you can put your ad in front of. Now, that has never been the case in the history of mankind. And so I think that's really powerful. I'd say it's, all small brands should be leveraging that, because it means your money goes further, you have less wastage, and you can make sure that your message lands in front of your ideal customer. So I would say, social media is super powerful, and hopefully there's a couple of examples of how you could utilize it.
Rob, what do you think about it?
I think that social media is really probably the major way that most people get information these days. And, I'm thinking a lot about brand positioning and design for this call. And I think that you not only have to have a compelling message, but you have to present it in a way that is visually compelling, which is why the work that folks at Designhill does is so crucially important. Because, let's face it, we get 80% of our information by scrolling on this all day long. And if you don't have a very strong visual, people aren't going to stop, and they're not going to read it. So I'm a huge believer in using social media to tell your story. And again, getting back to my PR days, back in the day, if you had a story you wanted to tell, you had to create a pitch, and you had to make it timely and topical and relevant, and hope and pray that someone in the media would actually write your story. But now anyone can print anything, or publish anything, anytime. So it's the combination of the compelling visual and really that compelling headline, because if you don't click on that to read more, people aren't going to read more. So it's that 1-2 punch. And I love what Matt said earlier, because I live in the strategy side too. And frankly, no one gets really jazzed by my work. They get really jazzed by how the work I does inform the creative expression. So it's actually really tough when you're a brand strategist to show ROI, because when I hand off my strategy based on the work that I've done and someone else interprets it, I can take neither the credit nor the blame for how successful that is. However, if it is successful, I'll take all the credit for it. Let's be real.
Steph, what do you think about it?
Yeah, I just wanted to give a good example, because my last question wasn't the right one. I think a really good brand to look at when it comes to social media, it's not a small brand, but it's maybe a brand people know. And I think it's a very good example is Absolute, the vodka. Don't drink and drive and all that. But it's a very interesting brand, because what they do really successfully is they have their product, which is a very distinctive bottle. You can recognize it from afar. And they've injected it into their social media storytelling. It's visually very attractive, which is very important for the right channel like Instagram. But they've also worked with artists around that product. And I think that's a very smart way, because you're kind of always showing your product without having to say, hey, this is an ad for buying my product. And it feels very natural. And I think if you can find ways to tell your story while also infusing your product or your service in a way that feels very natural, I think that's a very smart thing to do. And I often see a lot of smaller brands just talking about what all brands in the category talk about, because they have to, and they try to lean on the algorithms and what's working. but they don't really try to find a way to have like their own little storytelling platform or whatever you want to call that. I think Absolute, for example, is a great example of that.
All right. I hope you guys are enjoying the session. So before we move forward, I would like to give a quick shout out to Designhill, world's leading creative marketplace, for organizing this event. Stay tuned and we'll be right back to hear more from our panelists.
Climax is a full-service video agency based around video production. We created a brand that fit our identity at the time, but as we've evolved as a company, we found that that original brand didn't quite fit our aspirations anymore. Finding a partner to rebrand your entire company takes a lot of time and effort. Finding Designhill was an incredible lifeline. Designhill offers a money-back guarantee. If we don't like any of the designs, we get all of our money back. The stuff that we ended up with were well beyond what we had been seeing on other creative services platforms. After creating a simple design brief by answering some questions created by Designhill, we posted, and within a few days, we had over 250 entries. Designhill's platform made it easy to communicate with all of the potential designers. Eventually, we picked a winner. In addition to a logo, our designer also created a letterhead, business cards, and banners for all of our social media platforms. With Designhill's help, we now have a brand that meets our aspirations. We're ready for the future and everything that it's here to bring.
All right, we are back again. Let's continue with the session. So Matt, my next question is to you. Tell us some critical digital channels that fundamentally help any brand to gain awareness and growth.
Sorry, I didn't catch that. So channels to help brands do what? Sorry.
So I want to know some digital channels that fundamentally help any brand to gain awareness and growth. Like do you have any digital channel that works for pretty much for every brand?
No. The reason being, Kevin, is because I think if you have this isn't easy stuff, right? There's no silver bullet. You can't just press a button and out comes customers, right? You have to do the work. You have to roll your sleeves up. You have to get in there. You have to really add value. And I was going to sort of say this earlier in the conversation. Why do we get paid? Why does a consumer, reach into their pocket and pull out money and give it to you? And the answer is because you're adding value to them. They're getting something worthwhile, right? And so, it seems to me that that's different. The type of consumer that you go after and the type of business that goes after the consumer is going to be different, right? So, or even brands playing in the same space, offering the same product or service, they have to think about, who is their people? Who are their people? And then they've got to go after them. And that should be, in my view, different, because what you want to do is you want to make those people feel so special, so loyal, so happy with what you're offering. And it's not for everybody. It's just for them, that they stick around and they're loyal. And I think that comes back to some of the stuff that Peter was saying earlier. So for me, there isn't one channel that just, there isn't a magic bullet. And often, sometimes it's the channels. Like, for example, here's the thing. I'll give you this example. I was talking to a company the other day, and I said, what's working well for you in terms of the channels that you're using? And guess what they said? Handwritten letters. And I was like, what? Like isn't that like going back to like the Middle Ages? No, because they said handwritten letters, and they'd sent handwritten. They were finding it hard to get CEOs' attention. So they started writing handwritten letters, their salespeople, to the CEOs of these companies, and they started getting handwritten letters back. They could not believe it. Another example I found was, people reaching out with invitations or offers for like bottles of wine and stuff. And you think, what? They'd offer. So they basically said to the person they were targeting, if you get back in touch with us and allow us to have a meeting, we're going to give you a bottle of wine. Now, I don't know if that's kind of, allowed in some industries. Some industries that's like bribery laws and stuff, but they definitely got a response back, and they got face-to-face time with the people they were targeting, which is these are unusual tactics. They're odd, but they worked at the time for the brands that were working on them. So I would say there isn't one silver bullet, but I would say there are some places you need to play. You need to have a web presence for sure, because it's just a pointer. You know, it's authority. You need to have social media presence, but how far you go all in with that depends on who you're targeting. So that's my sort of response.
Amazing. So taking what Matt said and going to Steph. So if there is no silver bullet and we don't have huge budget to find which channel works, Steph, what will your idea to find this? How will you do it? What are the steps you will take? Steph, you're on mute.
Could you repeat the question, Kev?
So I'm saying, so as Matt said, yeah, that there is no silver bullet of a digital channel. Anything can work, and like you have to figure it out. So if you don't have that much of time, like a small business, don't have resources to find it, what will the first step that you will take to find the channel that you think will work?
You hire a brand strategist? No.
Hey!
No, I think I think what Matt said, it depends, is a really important part here, and we always need to take that into consideration. Trying out stuff is probably your best bet, and then the other one is doing some research. Some stuff you have to try. I mean, you can assume all you want about what's going to work, but you always have to try. Sometimes maybe SEA, Google advertising could work very well for you, but it could also not work very well. But of course, in combination with that, you can look at, for example, the search volume of a certain word that's related to the need of your customer. And so you can know whether there is people looking for that word and whether it's worthy to invest. And there's easy tools like Google Trends where you can already see behavior of customers and how they search and how they think. You can look at competitors' reviews, for example, and see how people interact and what kind of importance they value and what kind of things they value. So I like to see it of this combination, especially for smaller brands, of on the one hand being, I don't like the word, but okay, let's say agile, or being quick and trying out stuff and being quick and dirty, but otherwise also trying to validate somewhat smart in a smarter way, so you don't always have to go full on execution on everything. So there's a bit of a balance there. And I think people that do have the role of a brand manager in smaller organizations, that's not always possible, but people that do kind of take in that role have a very important part to play there.
Peter, what is your approach on it?
Well, first of all, Kevin, I'd like to say thank you for giving the really difficult questions to Matt first, because it's working for the rest of us. Sorry, Matt. But
thrown under the bus as usual.
So this medium question, I hear this so much. I'm the old guy of the group here, and I've almost kind of lived in the era of black and white television. Rob, I think I've got a little edge on you even then. And I can still remember, I'm used to living through the era of seeing new mediums coming in and everybody jumping on the bandwagon and saying, this is the fantastic thing, and confusing the medium with the message. The most important thing is the positioning for your brand, what it is that you stand for whom and why, and being consistent. Then looking at the relevant medium, and every medium has its upsides and its downsides. So now with this whole digital phenomenon, which is huge, there are many assets, and there's so many, it's so diversified now. Each one has its assets that appeals to a particular group in a particular way, but don't get completely bowled over by that. It's more important that you're consistent in what your customers are taking out about you than the message in which it's delivered in. So, I mean, for example, the latest big trend, after TikTok was Clubhouse, the special thing, let's get in there and just go in and chat, and so I've used that for a certain time. And for some people, that's a very useful medium when it comes in. For me, I haven't found it useful at all, actually, after all the hype. You're listening in there, and you sit in as this kind of rather strange observer for me, but for others, it's actually very, very useful to join in. And so, every medium has its own assets and needs to be reviewed, but do not confuse the medium with the message. That would be my advice.
Lisa, I'm taking the question what Peter, Matt, and Steph said. I'm throwing a different one to you. Like, what do you think? How to avoid amateur mistakes, which generally 95% brands make while elevating their brand? Because of social media, they can push easily. But what to avoid that they can save all the pain and misery?
Look, I think obviously we've already said it on here. So don't just push clutter and messages out for the sake of it. But I also think don't avoid making all mistakes, because sometimes it's okay to make mistakes and admit them and move forward. So I think when you're building your brand and you're deciding who you are and you put it out there, it's okay to also turn around and be human. Matt mentioned it above up there to say we actually need emotion. We need human-centered design. We need human-centered thinking. And I give an example of that. So we actually helped a UK brand of pea milk. So like oat milk, but made from peas, launch in the UK. And on launch, we called it a brand name that was called Mighty Society. And within the first 6 months, it didn't really shift off the shelf. And part of that was because people didn't actually really understand what it was. So whilst in the boardroom, it was an aligned name, everyone loved the name, they understood what it stood for. We'd been talking about it for months. When it was out there on the shelf in the world, people didn't understand what it was. And in the end, what we actually had to do was change the name of the actual brand. Change the whole brand name and go, it didn't work, but the product is still good. Everything we stand for is still the same. How do we communicate it better? And so I also think there's a big belief in that if you've got something and you believe in it and you're passionate about it, you've understood your purpose, it's okay to make mistakes. Work with professionals, ask questions, all of these different things we're talking about today. Do the work. Definitely do the work. Understand your why. But then when you put it out there, just test and trial. Otherwise, you'll be thinking about it by the time you go to market. It's too late. Someone else has done it. Just try. But don't be afraid to go, that didn't work.
Rob, what do you feel about it?
I'm fascinated by that example that Lisa gave, because I'm thinking, wasn't the name tested before it went to market? Because I think that we've all probably had clients where you're in a conference room and there's a management team shaking their head like this, talking about how wonderful their product and service is. But unless you do that external research to check in with your customer, it really doesn't mean a thing. What I always tell my clients, because I think we can all agree there's just so much noise and so much clutter out there, is to be simple and be specific. And I always say to my clients, whether they're corporate clients or personal branding clients, choose a lane. Like, what is your lane, and what is the 1 or 2 or 3 word associations you want with your brand? And then build everything around that, because people are just delusion overwhelmed. So the simpler you can be, the more recognized you can be, and the more compelling you can be.
I was about to ask question to Matt, and maybe realize that I'm asking all the tough questions.
He's just left it off.
He didn't want to take the question.
Steph, so it comes to you.
Should you always stay in your lane, though? Do you think it's ever okay to go outside of your lane? To go, oh, look, I'm supposed to be this, and I've defined myself as this, and I want to go off on a tangent?
Oh, yes, of
you think
course.
that's it?
Well, when I say choose a lane, what's your area of expertise? And then, of course, there are tangential things. So, when you're brand strategist, as we all are in some degree or another, you can do anything related to brand, and that can be, from moderating a focus group to crafting a radio script. It doesn't matter, but you just have to be known for the one thing. But of course, you can use it as a springboard for so much more.
Okay.
No, I think that's a good point, actually, Rob. I think most of the successful brands start as, say, a craft brand, and then it grows into its space. Like, there's only the big players that can really flex and go across loads of different categories. And I think you have to start, and I do think you have to have a niche to a degree, and then you can expand.
Agreed.
Steph, so I want to ask you a question. How to measure the right metrics which would determine success or failure of a brand?
Yeah. In that question alone, there's a lot of things you might pick out. Like, first, what are the right metrics, of course, and then you could decide how to measure them. And I think that's already a big problem. A lot of people, for example, when you are using digital tools, you tend to focus on digital metrics such as, awareness, the amount of followers, whatever it is, the PPC, or there's a lot of these words flying around. But the problem is really, I think you need to first off look at, whether you're working with a client that's the founder or the person who's running the business, at what his or her personal goals are, because we tend to forget that it's not only about brand growth, but it's about people that want to do a certain thing. They want to achieve a certain thing. Some people might want to say, I want to sell this brand within 2 years. And you have a completely different mindset than when you say, a person says, I love this and I'm going to do this for the rest of my life. The way you approach both projects is completely different, and so the metrics will be completely different. For one person, that might be, we will make sure you have 10 clients a year, and that's it. That's your metric. That's what you're going for. The other one might be profit margin. The other one might be how many people write you a personal handwritten letter a week. I mean, that's the real problem. And again, I know people don't benefit from these "it depends" answers, but I do think that's important. And one thing I would say is, like, try to level up your metrics. Like, okay, engagement is one way, but what is an engagement a proxy for? Okay, maybe it's how much people think our brand is relevant or interesting, and then maybe try to look at some other metrics like awareness, or maybe how many people are looking for our brand. You can do that with, for example, My Telescope. It's a really interesting tool. You can look at how much your brand name is actually looked up in Google, which is a really interesting metric, because that's an actual intent consumers do. They type in your brand name, so it must be something there. But just try to see, like, how does it relate to the personal ambitions and goals of the founder?
Lisa?
I think that was, Steph kind of covered it really well, to go like, how do you measure success? You've really got to understand what the goal is. And it's easier somehow to measure a campaign success. So the marketing side, the tactical side is so much easier to measure than the brand side. And the brand really comes to what's the goal. And you get that as a strategist when you sit there in those earlier meetings to go, what does success look like to you? Because it might be getting your brand across 10 different countries. It might mean everyone within the company understanding what you stand for. The goal is very different, and that defines that really dictates how you measure it. What do you think, Matt? He's back in the room.
Yeah. So Matt, I'll just repeat the question. I think you lost us. So we were talking about what is the right metrics, how to find it out, which determines success or failure.
Yeah, I mean, the guys have defined it. It depends on basically leadership. So it seems to me that brand is a tool to help push business forwards, right? And so, you know, it depends on what that business needs at that time. I think when you're starting out, you need, which is obviously the focus for this panel here. When you're starting out, you need to establish yourself in market. So, you know, your metrics, in my view, should be around, once you understand who your target audience are, you know, are they aware of what you're about? You know, how many people have you reached? And so then that drives down into the tactics. And as Lisa says, that isn't the sort of the brand strategy. This brand strategy initially is to set that strategy. The tactical thing, I often hand off to marketing, and I say, here you go, here's some thinking, here's a narrative, here's some story. We've tested it. We know that people like this. We know this is the right way to go. Over to you to make it happen, and then prod and sort of hold them accountable as you go through and help them through that. So that's kind of how it works, and I hope that helps to answer that question.
Peter?
Sorry, can you repeat the question for me again, Kevin?
Absolutely. So how to measure the right metrics which would determine success or failure of a brand?
I mean, again, I know I was listening to what Lisa said, and I would kind of reflect what she said. You have to kind of set your own goals first to see what is going to be a tangible success or not. You know, it can with small businesses, and you know, and my business is a small business. It can be as small as, you know, I would like to get 400 people visiting my website this month. You know, it can be as small as that. I would like to get, you know, X number of referrals if you're on a consultant thing, to, you know, tangible product sales, to any one of a myriad kind of rational measures. It could be, on the other hand, extremely sophisticated statistical analysis, cluster factor analysis, awareness levels and conversion of awareness levels into a propensity to purchase and all the rest of it. So it does depend on the scale. But for small businesses, I would keep it really simple and more common sense. What I find also is I prefer the rich kind of qualitative understanding of talking to people of whether you're really connecting with them, with your brand or your product or your service or your offering, and then try and quantify it, because doing it the other way, you can end up measuring completely the wrong things. I find Steph's got a point. If Steph, help me out here. You've probably got a much better answer than that.
No, just quickly wanted to give a practical example that came up. Recently did a brand audit for a brand, not a huge brand, but they had some scale. And what we did, just to give you an example of how these things can work for smaller brands, we basically looked at about, I think, 200, 300 reviews they had. We just dragged all of them into like an Excel, and we filtered out some of the clutter words that weren't meaning anything, and we put those in a tag cloud. And you could see like the biggest word that came up was relaxing, for example, for them. While in their communications today, they use a completely different benefit. It was much more focused on like skin and stuff like that. And so basically we had a very good idea of how consumers perceive them, and we then repositioned them and built the whole brand experience around that. Not just, of course, that single data point. We had to validate that with some other research, but just to give you an example how you can quite easily get some really good insights on brands thanks to these things that are out there digitally, for example.
I just want to add. I want to add one thought, and because everyone has answered this question beautifully about measuring metrics, but something that a lot of small businesses that I work with don't have is either a mission statement or a vision statement. And one way to measure the success of your brand is how close are you getting to achieving your vision. And I think that small businesses in particular don't think about having a statement like that. And when I tell them, when they struggle with figuring out their vision, because a lot of times people don't know, this is the very simple exercise that I give them. I said, imagine your brand in 5 years, and you are the cover story in a publication that you really respect. What is the title of your story, and what does the article say? And when you open a conversation like that, a small business is able to, fast forward where they want their brand to go. And then that's a really clever way to measure what their success is how close they are to achieving the vision.
So Lisa, as we move, this is the last question. I want to start with you. Developing a brand identity is one area of marketing that's often overlooked. How do you think a brand can leverage brand building and design platforms like Designhill to build its clear branding strategies?
So I think obviously we're all kind of independent, so we all want to work with actual brands and people. But I think knowledge is power. So I think the more you can learn about branding, all of us on this panel will reflect quite a lot on some of our teachings from people like Martin Neumeyer and the simple guidelines and introductions to brand strategy. And then you can learn the technical skills through Designhill. There's so many educational videos on how to build strong design. So I think there's always that strategy is the logic and design execution is the magic. We just, all the guys on this panel will know that one, and we've been trying to get that in all day. So you need both for your actual brand to exist in the world. So you need that thinking, you need the strong reason to believe, but it also, until someone makes that strategy real, it's nothing. It's just a good idea. It's just a good position. So I think using Designhill and these kind of platforms, you can just skill up. You can just get that knowledge. There's different areas you want to dip into. You can reach out to experts. So it's more about networking. Yeah. We all learn from each other. Even being on this platform today, we're all learning. We're the experts. We're all learning from everybody else. And so I think platforms like Designhill will help you widen your network. You need to go wide, and then you need to narrow it back down to define your brand.
Steph, what do you feel? Steph, you on mute.
Sorry, I was looking at the questions in the chat. So the question was how platforms like Designhill can help build brands.
Yeah, platforms like Designhill, who also do a lot of design works, and designers from all over the world, kind of work here. So how you think that platforms like this will help the small businesses to develop their identity, like actually designing it?
Yeah. Well, again, like to my point earlier about being smart with testing stuff and iterating, I think it's also smart to like be smart with your resources when it comes to design. And early on for small brands, you can't go to Ogilvy and pay $1 million to do some kind of logo or rebrand. So you have to be smart, but you also have to make sure that what you buy in terms of design is apt, and again, doing the research, making sure you understand it's distinctive from your competitors, all of that stuff matters a lot. But I do think it's great that there is some kind of like democracy for design in terms of like smaller businesses being able to buy quality design. But of course, there's a caveat where like the cheapest design isn't always the best option, and you really need to look according to what your position is. If you're just like a really startup, well, maybe go do a logo generator or whatever you want. But I mean, it's just making sure you find the right resources at the right moment and level up, that you don't stick at that price point where you started a year or 2 years ago. And at a certain point, you do have to invest in good design.
Peter?
Great point that Steph made. I mean, the cheapest design is not necessarily the best. It doesn't also mean that you have to pay, landlord $2 million to kind of give you an abortion of a design for the Olympics or something like that either. I mean, it can go to the ridiculous extreme. So, but what, good design, you can tell, because good design brings to your idea or your creative concept to life in a way that has that wonderful simplicity. It's got like that, oh God, why did I not think of that kind of feel that you would never get and you can't express in words or through a strategy document. But it just instinctively feels right and is unique to your brand. And it's such a difficult thing to express. And it starts, but you know it when you see it. And that's the kind of worst frustrating thing. It starts with having a very good brief, a brief to your design company or a brief to yourself, that actually says, what is the desired outtake? What are the consistencies? What is the promise of our brand? What's our DNA? I go back to that. What's our culture? And then let the experts in the design do what Lisa was talking about, actually experiment a little bit and see what absolutely kind of fits. And I've had fantastic designs come out of 99 designs for $350. And you've worked with fantastic people you've never heard of before, but they've got something and you can create it. And on the other hand, I've seen working with a small coffee group here in Canada here, and they are struggling on their 25th kind of cheap design thing, which has not captured their concept at all. And it's painful to go back to them and say, no, again, there's no idea in this. So you've got to keep trying until you get it. Having people like Designhill who are expert in that and who can help is a great starting point. I think that the thing is, no one creative executional house is going to have all the right answers all the time. I mean, I was lucky enough to work with the agencies, with Ogilvy's, BBDO, with Burnett's and things like this, and they all claim to be, the best and the most creative. And the reality is, they're hot in some things, really hot, but not hot all the time, and the creative talent isn't located in one area or in one company. It's diverse, it's around. So spread it out a little bit.
Rob, what do you feel about it?
Yeah, I really agree with everything Peter has just said. I've worked with clients before who have done their design work before engaging, and I'll look at some decisions they've made regarding their logo, their fonts, or the imagery that they choose. And I'm like, what was this based on? What are you trying to communicate here? And it's really the power of that creative brief and that collaboration with the strategist and the designer, because if you give a designer an assignment, he or she will likely come up with a beautiful piece, but it's a creative piece. It's not a strategic piece. And for a company to really stand for something and distinguish itself, that design has to be based on strategy. And I tell my clients, and I don't know if you all have experienced this, but I'll be standing in front of a management team and I'll be talking my branding and marketing jibe, and they're going like this. And I think they know what I'm talking about, but they really don't know what I'm talking about. And what I always suggest to them is that their logo that they think might be pretty or might be cool, it's really the start of a conversation. And if you can't tell a compelling and rich story about your logo that basically tells your brand story, then it's worthless. And that's an unpopular thing to communicate to a client who just did a logo, but it really is all about being strategic, and the strategy comes out of speaking to the customers, speaking to the prospects, and understanding what they want and expect from that brand, and then working in collaboration with that designer. And I agree with everybody, you don't have to spend $1 zillion, but it does have to be a collaboration and has to be based on something besides creativity.
Matt? You on mute, Matt?
Brilliant. That was just awesome, wasn't it, for the last question? So the question is, how does platforms, communities like Designhill, how would that help with brand building? Well, for me, I think it really does help in terms of finding resource early in your journey to kind of move forward. As the rest of the panelists have kind of said, this is about finding the right solution at the right time. And it seems to me, particularly for small businesses, they don't have the huge resource that maybe they would need to wheel in a strategist, to wheel in all this kind of stuff. You don't need it. You can go and find some of these answers from people around the panel, from books, all that kind of stuff. And then it's about executing. And so that's where I think you can learn from Designhill from, and also you can find people to execute for you. So I guess that's how they help build it. But all I would say is this is about managing meaning. So the choices you make when you set your business up and establish your brand are crucial. So you must take that very seriously if you want to build a brand. Manage your meaning.
Amazing. All right, that brings us to the end of this wonderful session with Lisa, Matt, Peter, Steph, and Rob. This was indeed a value-packed session, and I hope everyone enjoyed the discussion. Once again, I would like to thank each one of you for taking out time and to be part of this event. Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much. Awesome.
Thank you.